Time to let it rip. On the panel right now, the guru of public relations. He's the former press secretary for Detroit Mayor Dennis Archer and a key player in resolving a tense situation involving the police department in Grosse Pointe Park. Greg Bowens is back. And so is Dawood Walid, a Navy veteran, now a voice for those he says are too often mistreated by police. He's also executive director of the Council for American Islamic Relations. Also with us, the only man here who knows what it's like to patrol the streets of Detroit and to make life and death decisions every day. Retired detective Mike Carlisle is ready to weigh in. And so is Detroit Free Press photographer Mandy Wright, who was once detained by police for simply doing her job. As always, the spark of Let It Rip, lawyer, reporter, anchor Charlie Langton. Now, a little later, it's back to Iraq. U.S. troops have pulled out, but is the danger greater now than ever before? All right, let's get to the subject at hand. Greg, it's so sad that another black teenager has been killed at the hands of a police officer. So I can understand the outrage and the anger, but I can't understand why some of these protests have become violent and have turned to looting. What's going on?
You know, actually, I've been on both sides of these situations, from protesting when the right to work was in Lansing and they threw out the tear gas, to the newspaper strike, to pick your protest. I love a good protest. At the same time, I've been on the other side when I worked for Dennis Archer and we had the World Trade Organization here and you had the anarchists here and there was tension between the police and the protesters. And so neither one of those sides are very comfortable sides to be on. What I found most of the time is that these situations are generally a foil to make a larger statement. So the looting that goes on in lieu or in conjunction with a protest tends to be more about the social conditions that exist at the time, and people see this as a way to express their outrage and their frustration, not just with the incident, but with conditions overall.
Well, there have been protests tonight all over the country, almost all of them peaceful. But Dawood, you say that this is more than just about the death of one young man.
Most definitely, and we have to make clear there's no excuse for any plundering or property damage. At the same time, we have to understand that we have communities that are suppressed economically, that there's a history of police brutality, as well as these types of shootings that take place not just in this community, but all across the country. So this is in the mindsets of the people. For example, in 2012, 313 unarmed black men were shot and killed by police or George Zimmerman vigilante types. That means one black male killed every 28 hours. So this is in the mindsets of the people that this isn't just one isolated incident. This is a long history and that plays into people's minds, in which there can be a little spark that causes anger. And again, I'm not condoning at all the plundering or the property damage, but I can see how some people may want to vent their anger because it's not just about one issue.
But is it not true that you are in greater danger from another black man than you are from a white policeman sitting next to you? Is that not true? Aren't you in more danger from somebody who looks like you than you are from a white police officer any given day?
The police department has more of a responsibility. They're the ones who have positional power, and they're held at a higher standard than individual citizens who may perpetrate violence against each other. We're talking about structures and institutionalized violence, not violence done by individuals.
Well, you know, Detective Carlisle, you are the only one in this panel who has been on the streets.
Yes.
Who's had to make a decision, life or death, in the blink of an eye. Tell us what it's like from a police perspective.
Well, from a police perspective, I don't know of any person that gets hired on the police department that wants to come on the job and use their weapon to shoot somebody. That's not what they came on the job for. They came to help the community, number one, and secondary to that is to protect lives and property. And when it comes down to a life and death decision, whether it's saving a citizen's life in the commission of a felony or your partner or yourself, these are split-second decisions that the officer has to weigh, and the ramifications are just unbelievable, the weight that's put on a police officer's shoulder. You're going to be scrutinized by the community, the prosecutor's office, not only the department, but when you go home, everybody that you know is going to call you, your family's going to call you, and you, at some point, will start to doubt yourself. There's a lot of trauma that goes, and that, you know, like I said, the officer doesn't come on the job to want to shoot somebody. However, there are times when there is a necessity that has to happen. Unfortunately, in some areas, I can speak for Detroit, in some areas where, because I worked in a section where we investigated police shootings. I worked that unit for 5 years. Certain neighborhoods, especially high crime, low poverty neighborhoods, and that these things happen, you can get a crowd, and the thing that the police have to do quickly, because You can start out, it could be a good shooting, could be a bad shooting, it could be determined later by the prosecutor's office and by the police department. However, if you get somebody in a crowd that starts spreading the word, well, you know, the police didn't have their lights on, they didn't do this. Well, by the time it gets to you, well, now that story's been embellished 10 times. Now the crowd gets inflamed. Now we as police have a responsibility to protect the public. Well, the crowd's getting out of hand. We have to get that scene done. We'll deal with the community later, explain the facts. We have to get in and get out.
And Mike, that almost happened last night right here in Detroit. Undercover cops spotted an illegal gun sale. They called for backup. Backup came. They arrived. They spotted the suspects in an SUV. But instead of stopping, the suspects tried to ram the officers with the vehicle. The officers instinctively fired. They wounded one of the suspects. They caught them both. They're both in jail right now. But in the community, last night, a crowd gathered, and indeed the rumors started flying. And there were some who interpreted what happened as possibly police brutality. One young man actually crossed the police line, challenged the police. It could have led to something even more violent. Thank God nothing happened, but there is that situation. Meanwhile, Mandy, perhaps the antidote to this kind of situation, these rumors, is the truth. You have been in a situation where you had your cameras rolling and you were told to put that camera down.
Right. I think it's really important to have a relationship with the police department. I mean, I think that journalism and journalists inherently work with the community. That includes the police department. And we need to be allowed to tell the story of our communities. And with that, I think that the broader spectrum is that there needs to be training within the department so that this that First Amendment rights are not violated on the streets of Detroit, where I was arrested for simply just doing my job.
And yet in Ferguson, we have reports of 2 reporters roughed up and arrested, and tear gas thrown in the direction of a camera crew from Al Jazeera. All because the police officers apparently didn't want certain scenes shown. But don't you want the truth to come out? Now, there are 2 sides to this story. Witnesses say that Michael Brown had his hands up in the air, saying, "Don't shoot," when he was actually shot. But the police say that no, there was an altercation inside the police car, and that the officer was attacked and was himself beaten. And that led to the shooting. There are always 2 sides to every story. But Charlie, let me ask you, if indeed we know the name of the young man who died, Michael Brown, should we also know the name of the officer who shot him?
Yes, I think we should know the name of the officer, but I think more, and yes, we should know, because why keep it secret? It's the secrecy that now everybody's going to talk about rumors. Oh, it's this officer, it's this officer, it's this officer. The problem is that when a police officer tells you to stop, stop. If a police officer tells you to get down, get down. If the police officer is wrong, we'll deal with that in court. But on the street, we want to minimize the possibility of a bad decision being made. And unfortunately, or fortunately, on the street, the officer is king. If he's wrong, sometimes they are wrong. We'll deal with it in court later on when it's nice and easy and we can look at the facts. But people that try to push the officers around, people that don't have respect for the officers, I'm sorry. I just think that's a terrible situation, and it's a recipe for perhaps death.
You know, unfortunately, Charlie, even when people lay down on the ground after Michael Brown was shot, the LAPD just fatally shot and killed a black man who was laying down on the ground. So even when people comply, we still see unarmed black men getting killed. It just happened in Los Angeles.
It's not a perfect world. It's not just black men. It's not. You can't make this a white and black issue. Unfortunately, the stats, I don't know if I can agree with you on the 313 that you said has been killed. Well, a black man's killed by a police officer every 32 hours or whatever you said?
One every 20 hours in the year 2012. You can look at
where
that.
you got your stats, I don't know. But it's not exactly a white and black issue. It's police officers trying to fight crime. The circumstances are dealt with individually as these events happen, and that's the way they have to be judged.
Police
Black
officers
people
also
are the
kill
one
white
getting
people too.
disproportionately shot and killed by officers. We can't skirt around the point. Just like this country, we have more people in prison than any other country in the world, and it's disproportionately black males on nonviolent crimes. The
That's
same
not
thing
because
with
of the police. That's
it's
not
the
because
same-
of the police, though.
Oh well, we can talk about selective prosecution, selective policing
That's a
too.
totally different issue, though.
But then there's also the role of social media in stories like this. I don't know if you've seen the hashtag. The hashtag is "If They Gun Me Down," and it shows photos of some young black men who have been killed. Now, you'll see one photo that may have come from the parents of Michael Brown, and that photo will show him graduating from high school, on his way to college. But then you'll get a photo from a website that someone may have. And that website will have that same young man who looks successful on one side look like a thug on the other. And the question is, do these images really represent who these victims are? Are we making a mistake by the images we also promote on television, in newspapers?
Well,
who decides
I have
the image of the victim?
Well, I agree, and I've had the opportunity to cover a lot of trials where they're now using social media photos from Facebook to sort of demonize the defendant or whatever. So and a lot of times the judges have said, no, this is not appropriate, and we will not use these photos because it really does create an image of people on trial.
Well, this is the reason why, if you recall, after the riots in the 60s, why the news media really pushed to diversify their staffs, because they found that the lens through which the media was viewing riots and their access to the community was very limited, because they didn't have people in the community who represented folks who lived in the community, black folks, brown folks, other people, and who could see the human side of this. I think the social media thing is something that the media should use both pictures, because they're both true. And so we want to conveniently look at someone in the worst light when they're a criminal or accused of a crime, and the best light when they're a victim. But the truth is that there are many images to a person's life, just like there are many phases to it. And if we want to own up to the responsibility we have to each other as individuals, then we cannot be afraid to see all the pictures of somebody's life.
And that,
Well said.
absolutely, and that requires education. And you know that too well because you helped to defuse a situation in Grosse Pointe Park. Police there accused of misconduct, taping a mentally disabled man. You were able to resolve that by getting all sides to talk together.
Well, there's enough room on the side of righteousness for everybody. And unfortunately, when we take strong stances in our fear and in our anger, we don't allow enough room for people to get back on the right side. We're so busy accusing and attacking that all we do is add to the fear. And so this situation that's unfolding in Ferguson, I think Rochelle Riley said it in the Free Press, that there were so many mistakes that were made. The political system that was in place has completely failed these people, where they are out of touch, the mayor wasn't in touch, the governor's never around, and so they allowed the situation to just spin out of control. First with the policing, and the incident that led to the man being shot in the first place.
And that is the lesson for all of us, that we need to talk to each other before there's a confrontation. We need to talk to each other, get to know each other
Absolutely, no doubt.
before somebody pulls the trigger.
Absolutely.
Bottom line. Panel, thank you.